2 milligrams of fentanyl. That is roughly 10 to 15 grains of table salt. If you ingest this exact amount, it will kill you. A dose this small is completely invisible when pressed into a counterfeit painkiller or mixed into another substance. This chart shows American drug overdose deaths since the year 2000 compared to major conflicts. The death toll from overdoses, over 1 million people, surpasses the combined U.S. combat casualties of World War II and the Vietnam War. In 1971, the United States government declared a war on drugs. Over the next 55 years, the nation spent more than $1 trillion trying to police, interdict, and arrest its way out of the problem. Yet the cartels are richer today than ever, and the drugs are deadlier. For decades, the U.S. strategy focused on a physical agricultural battlefield, burning poppy fields and targeting specific geography. But a synthetic supply chain doesn't need land. It can operate anywhere there is a lab and a shipping port, making traditional interdiction maps obsolete. When Belgian chemist Paul Janssen first synthesized fentanyl in 1959, he created a highly controllable, fast-acting anesthetic. For decades, doctors administered it exclusively in sterile hospital environments for surgical procedures. The shift to illicit markets happened because of the drug's synthesis economics. Producing heroin requires acres of land, specific weather conditions, and months of cultivation. Fentanyl can be cooked in any commercial lab in a matter of hours, using industrial chemicals available globally. This graphic demonstrates the massive scale of return on cartel investments. A criminal organization can spend a few $1,000s to produce a single kilogram of fentanyl in a makeshift lab. Once pressed into hundreds of thousands of counterfeit pills, that exact same kilogram generates hundreds of millions of dollars in street-level revenue. Stripping away geographic limits and maximizing margins transformed a medical tool into a scalable commercial product, one that functions more like a high-yield financial instrument than a traditional agricultural crop. That global trade begins in Chinese industrial hubs. These factories produce chemicals with names like propionyl chloride, legal industrial compounds used in a wide range of everyday manufacturing. They are also the exact precursor ingredients required to cook fentanyl. When international regulators schedule one of these compounds for restriction, cartel-linked chemists instantly tweak the formula. They create an unregulated chemical analog that achieves the exact same result, staying permanently one step ahead of international law. The relationship extends deep into the financial system. Mexican cartels employ Chinese money laundering organizations, or CMLOs, to repatriate their profits. These shadow networks use underground banking, cryptocurrency, and trade-based laundering to move billions of dollars back across the border without triggering standard banking alarms. There is little evidence that the Chinese state officially sponsors this trade. Instead, massive regulatory gaps, vast manufacturing capacity, and an unaccountable shadow financial system simply provide a clear starting line for cartel operations. The manufacturing phase is controlled by two massive logistics networks, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. Under leaders like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, Sinaloa built an intricate web of affiliates operating across nearly every American state. CJNG operates with an even more aggressive posture. Their leader, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, commands a heavily militarized force that openly engages the Mexican army with rocket-propelled grenades and armored vehicles to secure trafficking routes. Their primary strategy relies on mass deception. Cartel labs combine the Chinese precursor chemicals to synthesize raw fentanyl. Then, they use commercial pill presses to stamp that powder into millions of identical copies of legitimate prescription medications. As these counterfeit pills flow north into the United States, military-grade weapons flow south. Cartel arsenals are overwhelmingly stocked with firearms legally purchased in American gun shops and illegally trafficked across the border, arming the exact organizations the U.S. is trying to dismantle. Arresting a single leader rarely disrupts the flow. These organizations operate as resilient networks with diversified economies, controlling everything from regional water supplies in drought-stricken areas to international avocado and lime exports. The massive supply of these drugs meets an equally massive American demand, rooted in the 1990s. Companies like Purdue Pharma aggressively marketed prescription painkillers like OxyContin, pushing loose prescribing guidelines that left tens of millions of Americans dependent on opioids. When the government finally cracked down on legitimate prescriptions, the cartels stepped into the void. Today, they completely bypass traditional street corners. Dealers use Snapchat, Telegram, and Instagram to advertise counterfeit pills directly to teenagers in quiet rural towns and wealthy suburbs, delivering drugs right to their doors. The buyers rarely know what they are actually purchasing. According to DEA testing, 6 out of 10 fake prescription pills seized on the street contain a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl. Despite the rising death toll, diplomatic efforts remain paralyzed. The United States blames China for the chemicals, China points to America's insatiable demand, and Mexico resents U.S. pressure while bearing the brunt of cartel violence. The final node in this supply chain, the American consumer, drives the entire operation. As long as digital platforms provide frictionless access to populations struggling with addiction, the market ensures the product reaches its destination. This comparison chart shows the lethal threshold of several synthetic opioids. While fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine, cartels are increasingly experimenting with analogs like carfentanil. Originally developed as an elephant tranquilizer, carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl. A single kilogram could theoretically kill 50 million people. As the timeline updates, we see new compounds like nitazenes emerging in the drug supply. These synthetic opioids have zero legitimate medical use and no established treatment protocols. Cartels are continuously synthesizing these new variants in a perpetual chemical loop, outpacing the slow process of international regulation. Supply-side law enforcement faces an enormous task. It is difficult to permanently interdict a drug supply when the enemy can design new chemical variants the moment a previous product is restricted. Between 2023 and 2024, the United States recorded a 25% decline in overdose deaths. That single statistical drop represents 28,000 Americans who survived the year, proving that the death toll is not fixed or inevitable. Experts attribute this decline to an increase in demand-side interventions. Widespread distribution of harm reduction tools, specifically overdose reversal medications like Narcan, allows communities to intercept fatal poisonings before they happen. Over the last 50 years, the American strategy has relied heavily on military and police drug interdiction, costing more than $1 trillion. Meanwhile, access to addiction treatment and community health resources has historically received a smaller fraction of that investment. Historical data suggests that while interdiction can disrupt routes, it rarely ends the market. The cycle continues as long as the underlying American demand remains, providing the financial incentive for the next iteration of the supply chain.